All right, Zizek, and there was another super chat question here which asked, was Karl Marx a genius? Yeah, I mean, he probably was a genius. I mean, in a sense of very, very smart and very high IQ. He probably had that. He writes really well. There's no accident that he has the kind of massive influence that he has. He writes well. He is a very, he's very observant. So, one of the amazing thing about Marx is when you read Marx is you see how much respect, if you will, he has towards capitalism. That is, Marx clearly states that never in the history of mankind has there ever been anything close to a material wealth-producing system as capitalism is. So if Jordan Peterson is arguing, look, capitalism produces wealth, Marx is going to say, absolutely, I agree with you. It's just, Marx believes that capitalism inevitably hits a brick wall, and that in order to get to the next phase of human success, he believes that capitalism is an essential phase, in this dialectic, in the evolution of humanity. Capitalism is an essential phase, and that phase hits a brick wall because of the exploitation of the workers, and that the workers ultimately rebel, and that the truth that the workers have is of a utopian future, of a true, more human future, utopia. And that by defeating the bourgeoisie, by overthrowing capitalism and rejecting the bourgeois, that ultimately, and even then it takes evolution. First you have to have, a kind of dictatorship, but then ultimately you evolve to a state where there is no politics, in a sense, where you're just in euphoria constantly. That everything you ever wanted, any way in which you can ever express yourself is manifest in that reality. And Zizek refers to that when he talks about the fact that Marx was not an egalitarian, in the sense he didn't believe in equality other than in the material sense. He believed in doing away with material hierarchies, but he believed in hierarchies, supposedly, according to Zizek, and everything else. So in this utopia one day, you will be able to do what you really love doing. You won't be constrained by material constraints, because there will be so much material goodies out there that everybody will be able to be super rich, basically, right? This is the world of AI and robots. And as a consequence of that, right, you will be able to sing if you want to sing. You will become a musician. You will become a painter. You will be able to become a gardener. Whatever it is you want to do, you will be able to do. And in there will be hierarchies. There will be good people who are good at it, people who are not so good at it. But it won't manifest itself in material differences in this future utopia, Marxist utopia. And again, I mean, I think Peterson did an okay, pretty weak but okay job of challenging some of that, right? But again, never morally, never really philosophically. Just, how does it work? How does this happen? What's the mystical sauce that makes it happen? That was the level at which he was, doing this. I mean, Zizek is very similar, I find, to Peterson. He's a very similar type of thinker. There are more similarities between the two, and I think ultimately, deep down, more agreement between the two than there are differences. You guys are going to have to slow down with all these super chat questions, because it's going to be a while before I can get to them. And if you keep doing this, then I'll lose them, and I can't keep track of all of them. Zizek is a very similar thinker to Jordan Peterson. Not very focused, not very systematic, never define your terms, to some extent stream of consciousness, attacks on capitalism, basically a presentation of a very pessimistic view. I think Jordan Peterson is more pessimistic about individual human life, in the sense that Jordan Peterson views life as he said it, as fundamentally about suffering that can be overcome, but fundamentally about suffering. Zizek is much more pessimistic about the world, about society, because he believes capitalism is evil and is a destructive force and creates these awful things. But what's interesting about Zizek is he actually spent more time, I think, in his opening statement criticizing the academic left than he actually spent time criticizing capitalism, which I thought, again, was strange. So they each talked, there was no overlap between what they were talking about. They each talked in completely different directions. And it didn't really add up to anything. And Zizek, again, is very much a anecdote here, anecdote there, clever remarks here, something insightful over there, never integrated, nothing coming together in any kind of cohesive fashion. And, so it's hard to grab onto stuff and refute it. I mean, I would have literally had to stop every 2 minutes and refute every 2 minutes, because every 2 minutes he said something that was wrong. The same with Jordan. And of course, that's impossible to do. But Zizek is a Hegelian. He says he's a Hegelian. And part of the problem with Hegelians is they believe in the fact that contradiction is just part of reality, part of life. Life is all a contradiction. Reality is a contradiction. And therefore, they don't mind contradicting themselves. So they're not looking for consistency. They're not looking for integration. And I think Zizek, at the end of the day, is much more disintegrated. Jordan tries to integrate everything around his conception of God or his conception of his metaphysical conceptions. Zizek has nothing to integrate around. It's not clear what he believes. He likes some of Marx, but he doesn't like other things in Marx. He doesn't like communist political manifestation in the Soviet Union and in China, in authoritarianism. He believes in some form of democratic communism, which is popular among Marxists these days. And, but it's not clear exactly what he believes in. He believes in democracy, but not really, because he thinks people's judgment is not very good. He doesn't believe in rule by technocrats, by experts. He thinks that's where the Soviet Union went wrong, is that it tried to rule through the wisdom of experts, and he believes in the wisdom of crowds, I guess, but he never really actually says it. They all never really say what they mean. Zizek identified 3 things that are going to probably end the world. One is ecological, and Jordan Peterson, somewhat agreed with him on that. Biotech, genetic engineering. Zizek is terrified of genetic engineering, and I can see why one would be terrified of genetic engineering of all the things. And then what he called apartheid, that capitalism creates apartheid. Capitalism creates identity politics. Capitalism creates, in his view, separation between the races and the oppression of Africa, which then creates the need for the Africans to emigrate into the West, which creates more conflict, which, so he sees things through, capitalism's oppressive nature, not through the lens of race as an oppressor or gender or kind of the postmodernist group politics. He views it all as just one, right? Everything is economic oppression. Yeah, Bradley Thompson on Facebook has a quote from the Communist Manifesto. He says, the bourgeois, during its rule of scarce 100 years, that's just 100 years, right, has created more massive and more colossal productive forces than have all preceding generations together. I mean, it was, in a sense, self-evident, not self-evident, anybody with eyes and half a brain looking at the 19th century and knowing a little bit about history and knowing a little bit about the condition of mankind pre-industrial revolution knew that that was true. And Marx, while criticizing it, had at least the balls and the honesty. In many things he was dishonest, but in this he was honest, to say, yeah, this system creates wealth. And yeah, we actually need this system to play out, because we need that wealth in order to create our utopia, which won't depend on wealth. so a lot of Marxists say, look, Soviet Union was never really Marxist because, Marx wouldn't have never imagined that the communist revolution would happen in Russia because Russia was never capitalist. That the communism had to rise from capitalism, emerge from capitalism, organically in a sense. And Zizek would argue that the best case scenario today would be that that is what happens. As capitalism is in decay, that's what happens. Now, this is the problem. Zizek identifies lots of real problems with capitalism. Lots of real problems with the world today. And he identifies that with capitalism. The world today as capitalism. This is what Elizabeth Warren does. This is what Ray Dalio does. This is what everybody out there in the world today does. What they do is identify the status quo, what we have right now with capitalism, and then they attack not the status quo. They attack the elements in the status quo that are capitalist. So they blame all the problems on those features that are still free, those areas where we are still free, those areas in the economy where business is still free. They attack those while saying the problems are the problems of the status quo, and they're identifying status quo with capitalism. Never, of course, arguing, never suggesting, never that maybe it's the mixed economy that's the problem. Maybe it's the statist elements within the status quo of the world that exists as it exists today which are causing the problems. They never suggest that. And again, Jordan Peterson didn't do anything to bring that out of Zizek, to challenge Zizek on that. Wait a minute, we don't have a capitalist world today. Because Jordan Peterson doesn't know what capitalism is. He couldn't define it if his life depended on it. Right? Oh, somebody says there's a Zizek video on Ayn Rand. No, I haven't watched that. I need to watch Zizek's video on Ayn Rand. That would be interesting. Painful, I'm sure, but interesting. Peterson at some point in the debate literally said, I am not going to defend capitalism. It's bad. It's just better than the all alternatives. That is a killer, right? That is a killer. And then,
but how can you expect to reverse this trend when, as we've said, the country is run by majority rule through ballot, and that majority seems to prefer to vote for this modified welfare state?
Oh, I don't believe that. You know as well as I do that the majority today has no choice.
What do you mean?
The majority has never been offered a choice between controls and freedom.
How do you account for the fact that an almost overwhelming majority of the people who are regarded as our leading intellectuals and our leading industrialists, the men whom you seem to admire the most, the men with the muscle and the money, favor the modified capitalism that we have today?
Because it is an intellectual issue. Since they all believe in collectivism, they do favor it. But the majority of the people has never been given a choice. You know that both parties today are for socialism, in effect, for controls, and there is no party. There are no voices to offer an actual pro-capitalist, let's say fair, economic freedom and individualism. That is what this country needs today.